I have a question. Do you want to fully live the life God intended for you, but instead you're plagued by self-doubt and self-criticism, convinced you really can't achieve your dreams? Well, we're talking about finding your inner artist and silencing your inner critic next on Significant Insights. Welcome to the program. Do you believe God created you uniquely and for a special purpose? You may not realize it, but no one else has your genetic code, your set of experiences, and your point of view. Each one of us is rare, different, and created by God. Josh White, a songwriter and one of the pastors at Campus Church San Francisco, wants to encourage all of us to find our inner maker, that creator, artistic part of us. But Josh knows that often that artist in us can be silenced by what he calls our inner critic. He's written the book, Makers and Monsters, to help people discover their passions to create a life that's really worth living. I had the opportunity to sit down with Josh to talk about what it's like being part of a church in the heart of San Francisco, and about his book, Makers and Monsters. Josh, thanks for taking time to be with me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You're part of a very interesting church called the Campus Church.
Yes.
San Francisco, in what's called the Marina area. Yes. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so Campus was planted about 4 years ago. And our pastor, Pastor Travis, he just decided that God was leading him to plant a church in San Francisco. San Francisco is a very unique beast when it comes to its culture. People are very proud about the neighborhood that they live in inside of San Francisco. And so in the Marina, we have a lot of college and career presence there. Very young millennials. A lot of them work at a startup. Either they work at Yahoo or somewhere like Apple, or even Amazon is now in San Francisco. And so we have a lot of young college and career demographic that flows through the Marina District. The interesting thing about that is San Francisco is one of the most unreached cities in America, and the college and career age is one of the most unreached ages in America. So we're kind of trying to hit two birds with one stone, being in the Marina.
What kind of challenges, Josh, does that present to you?
Yeah, well, I think San Francisco in itself is a challenge. I mean, the expense is, it's the most expensive city in America, so that alone is quite challenging. But, I think one of the things that I think some people would view as a challenge, which is reaching college and career age people. I think for Pastor Travis and myself also being a pastor there, to give us more passion for what we do, because that is our age group. We're both millennials, and we see a lack of the presence of Jesus in their lives. And what we want to do is invest what we can with our leadership, with our shepherding, or our pastoral advice, and give that back to them, primarily the people that live in the Marina.
Now, who are primarily the people who attend the church?
So we have a church of a lot of people who don't believe in Jesus. So what I mean by that is we have people that come in and they're just looking for a community. They're looking for a place to belong. We think it's beautiful that they've chosen a place that holds Jesus as king to say, I just want to be part of this community. And by our investment of love, of grace, of being just a simple reflection of Jesus, they actually find who Jesus is inside of those conversations that we have.
You've written a book entitled Makers and Monsters. That's a very interesting title. Finding your inner artist, fighting your inner critic. Explain your title.
Yeah, so I firmly believe that everything rises and falls on leadership, but that leadership is not done well. I think the people who you are leading, they can fall by the wayside. And when I'm leading someone inside of my own personal development, with leading them with my leadership development, I look at it as a work of art. I want to see them become the person God intended for them to be. But the flip side of that too is all of us were created to create something. And I firmly believe for myself, the thing that God has positioned me here on earth to do is to do two things: to lead a community of people and to help assist our lead pastor with pastoring the people of San Francisco, but also creating leaders inside of people as well. So with that intent, I know I'm called to make leaders. I'm called to make disciples of Jesus. And for that reason, I call myself a maker. I think it's just another way of calling yourself a creative, or another way of calling yourself a leader. But the flip side of that is there are things inside of us called insecurity, lack of confidence, inadequacy, that are these tensions and these inner conflicts that we deal with almost on a daily basis. And I consider those the monsters in my life that I have to remove to get out of the way so I can be the maker that God intended for me to be. So that's kind of where the title came from.
So a maker is a person with purpose,
Yes.
a creative
Yes.
purpose. Are we all creative?
I
mean,
firmly,
again,
yeah.
I know people who would say, "Ha, that's funny."
Yeah.
I'm the most least creative person you
Yeah.
can possibly imagine.
Well, I think the funny thing about that is everyone thinks a creative is a artist, or they're a singer or a songwriter or a painter. And God didn't intend for us to live to a systematic mold when it comes to how we live our lives. The world is too beautiful of a place for us to live day to day, just plan A to plan B, one step to the next. God intended us to experience life. And from those experiences in our lives, we create our lives. So, for example, when you're a mother and you have kids, you're trying to create the best version of the son or daughter that you have. You want them to excel in life. You want them to go to the next step. You're creative. You're creating influence and leadership inside of your child's life. Or a pastor, he's trying to build a church. You're trying to create a church. You're a creative. You're putting together your creativity.
So we
to
all
lead a
create
church.
something.
Yes.
We all have a creative end. You come up with a recipe. You've created something. So all of us, even if we don't believe we do, we all have a creative instinct, which is all to then that part of that creative instinct of the maker becomes part of our purpose.
Right. I think it is our purpose. I think God never intended us to, again, just do point A to point B, but He created us so we can create in the image of our Creator.
I'm sure you run into millennials who come in who really have no concept of purpose. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think that actually attaches to a millennial or whoever, their view of the American dream. So what I mean by that is this. People that don't know their purpose, most likely they don't know their purpose because they don't understand their own identity. And the interesting thing about the millennial-driven dream, which now, at least in the Bay Area with San Francisco, is I'm moving to San Francisco. I'm going to go work at a startup. And my whole purpose of being there is to perform to the best of my ability. My whole purpose of being there is to make a lot of money. I want to see a 6, potentially a 7-figure digit on my paycheck. But the problem with that is you're finding your identity in what you can produce, what you can do, not who you are. Not even who you are, but who Jesus says that you are.
So who you are is more than your job?
100%. Oh, yes. Who you are is your favorite recipes. Who you are is how you like to take your coffee.
Do you know how many men retire and who totally lose their identity because their identity was what they did?
And they don't know what to do with their lives after
Have
retirement.
no idea. No, have no idea.
It's because they've lived decades of their lives with the purpose and their identity of, I wake up today to do this one thing, not I wake up today to be this person. And that's why. That's why they lose who they are, maybe because they never really knew who they were.
So what happens when you find that creative purpose within you, but your inner critic tells you that you really aren't good enough, or talented enough, or smart enough? Well, we'll talk about that right after the break.
She started telling me what she does for a living, what she does for a paycheck. And I said, no, that's not what I asked. Who are you? What is it that you do? What is it that you create?
Welcome back. Today, songwriter and pastor Josh White is talking about tapping into that creative process that he believes exists within each one of us. He's written the book, Makers and Monsters, about how to find your inner artist and how to fight your inner critic. As we continue, Josh describes how that inner critic can attack us from within.
I could have the best day ever tomorrow, and I can wake up and say, man, this is the best version of Josh I've ever seen. And if I do something just slightly insignificant that day, I say to myself, I'm just not worth anything anymore. So for some reason, we've taken what we can do and how well we do it equals how valuable we are as a person. And so with me personally, that's probably my biggest downfall as a leader, as a pastor, is my insecurity or my feeling of inadequacy. I guess it basically is me saying, I feel like sometimes I'm not good enough. And I've got to remind myself that I don't have to be good enough because Jesus is more than enough.
Is part of it the difficulty of who I see in the mirror?
I think that's definitely a huge percent of it, at least for some people. You know, they wake up and they want to have that other 20 pounds gone, or they want to have a different hair color, or they just wish their face looked different or like this other person.
Or the choices, I'm not who I want to be. I'm not who I should be. I'm not who Christ, who God is expecting me to be. And I think sometimes perhaps, Josh, because of we equate natural life with our spiritual life. And we see God as wanting our performance. And is that part of what the monster becomes? That that we see God almost in an earthly context,
Right.
rather than a spiritual context.
I think sometimes we see it that way because, well, we're human. So I think God obviously has this supernatural oversight of what humanity is. But we can only see who we are with our very humanistic minds, with who we are as a creation from the Creator. So I think because of that, God has a much more pinpointed viewpoint of who we are, but what we do is we see who we can be, not who we are in the present, but we also have this guilt of this is who I was in the past. So how am I going to move forward being who I think God wants me to be if I'm like this right now? I have all this debt in my life. How in the world can I make a savings account? I have this stumbling block. And so what do? We just don't even try. It's like someone who goes to the gym just a couple of times and they see a slight progress, but they wake up one day after they've been to the gym and they still weigh the same. They stop going to the gym because like, this isn't working. Why even try? Because I'm putting all my effort into this and nothing is happening. So we're always constantly comparing ourselves with one another. And one of the things I try to say, I heard a pastor say that we constantly compare our behind the scenes to someone else's highlight reel. And it's so true. I think that's something social media does in our lives. And so if we're comparing who we are behind the scenes to what we see in the public viewpoint of everyone else, well, number one, we're comparing the wrong things to the wrong reason, but then we're competing with ourselves, that our behind the scenes isn't good enough, that our highlight reels isn't good enough for our lives.
So how do we, in the book, how do you talk about what we do about that? What's the balance?
The story of Gideon comes to mind. And so I think of Gideon, and you see, he's one of my favorite characters in the Bible. But what I love about it is so many people focus on what he did at the very end. He became God's mighty warrior. What I love about that identity is God never called him Gideon. He always called him God's mighty warrior. That was his spiritual birthright. That was his spiritual name. Gideon was his human name. But we always talk about how he defeated the Midianites and he took Israel out of captivity. We never talk about that first portion of Gideon where he felt so inadequate to be God's mighty warrior. Because his response to God, it says the angel of God came upon Gideon and talking to Gideon, and he says, God's with you, O mighty warrior. His response was, with me? And he says, I'm the least of the least. So he was in the 12 of 12 out of the 12 tribes of Israel. He says he was the least of Manasseh. And then he says, I think in the Message translation, he says, and I'm the runt of the litter. So he's like at the bottom of God's barrel, right? And we see Gideon comparing everything around him to who he was. So he's comparing who he is to everybody else, but he's not listening to what God says about him. So I think the cure for insecurity or your inadequacy comes from your true identity. And that's the first place we have to start, is knowing God is not what you're able to produce. Who God is and who he says about you is who you are, your character, your integrity. Start with that as your foundation and then build your life on top of that. And I think that's a great shield against the monster.
You know, something I really like about the story of Gideon is when he and his armor bearer went down, or he and the person who went with him went down and hid behind the rocks, and they were listening.
Yeah.
Basically what the story was, I had a dream, and he said, what was the dream? He said, I dreamed that a barley loaf rolled down the hill and knocked over the tents. And it wasn't a white knight on a beautiful steed. It was a barley loaf. And I think God was saying, look, I know who you are.
Yeah, you're a farmer. You're a farm
you're
boy.
a farmer. I know who you are. I know you're the least. I know all of that. You know, that's not a surprise to me. But what you need to know is I can take barley loaves and I can do great things.
Exactly. I mean, so I relate to that so much. I grew up in a small little farm town outside of Indianapolis. And I remember just thinking to myself when I was 18, when I first wanted to come out to San Francisco, I remember reading that story of Gideon and just thinking to myself, if Gideon, the least of Manasseh, the runt of the litter, can be God's mighty warrior, then maybe I can be good enough to move out to San Francisco to see what God has for me.
How do you tell people that they can discover what they're passionate about?
Yeah. Well, I think you got to look at, what do you do? So what I mean by that is, let's say, I was actually having a conversation with a lady in our church last week, and she kind of asked me this same question. And I was like, well, what do you do? And she started telling me what she does for a living, what she does for a paycheck. And I said, no, that's not what I asked. Who are you? What is it that you do? What is it that you create? And she's like, well, I have children. I was like, okay, so you're a mother. I love to cook. Oh, so you're a chef. And she said something else like, I love reading blogs on the internet. Oh, so you're a reader. Have you ever thought about making a recipe website that's maybe for moms that have to make a quick recipe at night? And she was like, you know what, Josh, that sounds like something I would be so passionate about. So you've got to look at not what you have to do to put food on your table. We all have to do things that sometimes we don't want to do to supply income.
But in a sense, what you're talking about is finding your creative flow.
Exactly.
And finding that flow, I think, is very important. And sometimes the pressure from family, friends, others, culture, is to push us away from the maker that we are, would you say?
But you look at some of the biggest influencers, especially in the Bay Area, if not the world, Steve Jobs. He did things so differently than any other CEO would. You look at people, look at Albert Einstein's he called it his daily rituals. He would stop working at noon, 12 o'clock every day, and he would force himself to take a 3-hour walk just to think every single day.
That's incredible.
And no one else at that period of time would ever do that. They had the 9 to 5. They would only do that. But then who do we know about? We know about Einstein, because he did not do what society said he needed to do, but he knew, this is who I am. This is how I function. This is how I can create the best life that I can create and how I can produce something. So I'm going to do this because this is how God has uniquely designed me.
Hey, this has been good. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having
appreciate
me.
it. Yeah.
Appreciate it.
You can read more about finding your inner artist and fighting your inner critic by getting a copy of Josh White's book at makersandmonsters.com and through commercial online retailers. More on our true identity in Christ right after this.
Remember that Jesus, who Scripture says is our older brother, Jesus is the one who brings us into that love of the Father. What Jesus experienced under the words of God the Father is the same thing we're designed to experience every single day of our lives. We're to remember that we are a daughter, we are a son who is loved. We are the beloved. God is pleased with us. God loves us. God delights in you.
Today we talked about the artist and the critic within us. As Josh White explained, the best remedy to our inner critic is understanding that we don't have to be enough because Christ in us is more than enough. Dr. Daniel Hill, founding pastor of River City Community Church in Chicago, talks about our true identity in Christ in today's final thoughts.
Hi, friends. I just want to take the opportunity to perhaps remind you of something you already know. If you've not heard this before, I can't think of something that's more important for you to hear. And it's this simple but profound idea that who you are at your core, that who you're designed to be at your core, that your identity at its deepest level is meant to be rooted in the fact that you are a beloved child of God. There's nothing more true of you. There's no words that you need to reflect on deeply than that reality. I think it's so interesting that when we track the life of Jesus, we don't know much about Jesus before he launches into public ministry. And all four gospel accounts start his launch into public ministry at the same point, where he's baptized with John the Baptist. And when Jesus comes into those waters to be baptized, it says that the voice of the Father comes down upon him and says, "This is my Son, whom I love and with whom I am well pleased." And the Holy Spirit comes upon him like a dove. It lights up, it even says in some versions, this message of the belovedness inside of him. And it's so significant. If these words would have happened at the end of Jesus' ministry, it would have appealed to our deepest fear, that we have to be perfect, that we have to do everything just right in order to hear these words of belovedness from God. But Jesus hears this before he ever performs a miracle, before he ever heals anybody, before he ever does anything noteworthy. He is loved not because of what he's done or not done, not because of what he's going to do or not going to do. He's loved because of who he is. And these are the words from the Father that fill him and hold him and sustain him as he enters into the world to combat evil and to heal people and to do the will of his Father as it is revealed to him. It's the starting point for everything. And so I would just encourage you, to the best that you can, allow the Holy Spirit to simulate that same kind of a thing for you, to rest in the words of the God, the Father, who says, "My daughter, my son, I love you. You are my beloved. I am well pleased with you," not because of what you've done, not because of who you are, not because of what you will or won't done, but simply because of who you are. when we're able to internalize the deep love that comes from this message of the gospel, this good news of a God who loves us to this degree, it changes everything. And the power of those who would say our value is tied to something else becomes less and less when we're fully connected to those words from God the Father. So that's the blessing I want to share with you today. Remember that Jesus, who Scripture says is our older brother, Jesus is the one who brings us into that love of the Father. What Jesus experienced under the words of God the Father is the same thing we're designed to experience every single day of our lives. We're to remember that we are a daughter, we are a son who is loved. We are the beloved. God is pleased with us. God loves us. God delights in you. And when you think about a God that delights in you, it opens up a whole response where you too can delight in God. Be blessed by those words. Live deeply in that sense of identity. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Daniel Hill. I appreciate those words. Beautiful. In fact, I enjoyed the program very much. Can you imagine how Peter must have felt, a big, burly, uneducated fisherman, if Jesus had revealed his plan to him immediately and said, you're going to impact the world from now on? I'm sure Peter would have said, not me, you got the wrong guy. Or Matthew, the tax collector, hated tax collector. Because both of them were people that it didn't appear could achieve anywhere near what Jesus had in mind for them. But the thing that I liked about the program today is that we emphasize the point that it's not so much about us, but it's about what God can do through us if we're willing to allow Him to work through our lives to achieve His purposes. And so many people are caught up what they can't do rather than allowing God to do what He can do through them. Thanks for joining me. God bless you. We'll see you next time on Significant Insights.